Hello and welcome to Other Record Labels, the art and culture of running an indie record label. I'm Scott. Thanks for joining me and tuning in. If you remember a couple weeks ago, I mentioned that I messaged a few I messaged a few labels on Instagram and asked them two questions. The first question I asked was, what are some of the challenges that you face with your label today? And we made an episode about that 2 weeks ago. So listen to that if you haven't. But I want to address today the second question I asked, which was, what would you consider to be a big win for your label? And so what I did is I got a bunch of these responses and shout out again to Warhen, No Hope Records, Sheer Luck, Writing Records, Bar None, Egg Hunt, Dear Life Records, Windspear, Chord Organ. These are a bunch of labels that I just randomly messaged and they got back to me. Sorry if I missed any, because I know a few emailed me their responses, but it was completely random. This isn't a scientific study or anything, but I circled five, and forgive me, my notes are a mess, but I circled five responses that were all pretty common amongst all the responses, and definitely responses that I thought you would find helpful. So today I want to share with you these five big wins that would be five events or things that indie labels would consider to be a big win. And I think you'll find these really helpful. By the way, I wanted to mention that we do have a little Facebook group that's starting to kind of heat up a little bit, where people are posting an issue that they're having with their label or a question that they might want to ask the community about. So the group is called Other Record Labels. I don't really have a link for it right now, but I'm sure there's a way to find it. And here's how you can really definitely find it, is by going to otherrecordlabels.com and downloading the free guide that we have. That is a lot like what I'm talking about today. Basically, a lot of advice that I've surmised from the episodes with the labels that we've talked to, some of the tips that they've shared. So go to otherrecordlabels.com. and you can hear all about that. Here's five big wins for an indie label. The first one is receiving an unsolicited write-up. And this would be basically like receiving free PR. And I think it's an interesting one. It's something that I've experienced. I would say every release, there's something, almost every release, there's a little free piece of press that we get that I wasn't expecting. Somebody discovered the album, or generally it's like inclusion on a playlist that I didn't ask for. I don't know how they found out about the song or the album. I think it's such a cool thing because, and this person who mentioned this was talking a lot about PR campaigns. And I know a lot of the indie labels that we talk to and that listen to this show, and of course DIY artists are opting to do their own PR as opposed to hiring out a third party or an agency to do it. And it's primarily for financial reasons. And so I think when something like this comes along, I mean, I know how it works. We blast 200 or 300 emails and hope for a blog to cover the record or a playlist to include one of the songs. And so when something like that comes along without us asking for it, it shows that the album has legs of its own, and that it's something that the artist have done, or it's something that just happened naturally and organically. And I do think it's a big win. I totally agree with this, and I love seeing when that happens. What's interesting about these big wins, and I know it's kind of a silly way to say it, but it definitely generated responses when I asked, what would you consider to be a big win? But to me, it reminds me, like I heard this quote recently that was like, you can't reach a new destination. If you can't describe a new destination, then you'll never get there. And so I think of the two questions I asked, I think this one is a little bit more important, because this can help us establish goals and to work on a strategy or something to aim for. And so I found it really interesting. And some of these things that people verbalized are things that I have always thought, but hadn't really put down on paper. So it was really special to hear back some of these responses. The second thing was an increased interest in the back catalog. And this is a huge thing because, I mean, when you think about big labels, like massive labels, and we heard this from Sub Pop with the amount of success that Nirvana's first album, Bleach, still has today. And I'm sure the same is true for a lot of their records. But I know that a lot of major labels break even and receive their income and a huge source of their income from really old records that are 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old or more. And I think that's the ultimate goal, and not the ultimate goal, but it's a huge goal for indie labels to receive that type of consistent income from songs that are 5 years old or from albums that are 5, 10, 15 years old. And it's something that I personally am starting to see a little glimmer of, of a record or a song that gets a certain consistency and listens. And it's such a dream come true, because really a song shouldn't die. You shouldn't have a song that lives for just the week of its release or the month of its release. It's such a beautiful thing to see an increase in the back catalog. And I think obviously what this person is referring to as well is the idea of somebody discovering an artist, then going to your label page and discovering similar artists. And we talked about that a little bit with Kevin of Top Shelf. And I think that's a great thing. Number 3 is a popular indie artist recommending our music to their fans. This is a huge one. And it's a really beautiful thing when it happens. And I do see it happen sometimes on Twitter, where an established artist will recommend much smaller indie artists. And I think that really helps. It's a great way for those artists to pay it forward. I've honestly had this like fantasy of like somehow a major artist like Taylor Swift discovering a track of mine and putting it on her playlist or tweeting about it, and then like instantly paying off my mortgage or going to Disney World. But I think what this person is referring to is something a little bit more realistic, which is just indie artists who hit a certain level, propping up some of the indie artists who have received less exposure or a little bit more unknown in the community. So I would consider that a big win as well. Number 4 is breaking even. That's a basic one, but it's so true. And I know that accounting is a hard thing for indie labels, and it's something that I hope we talk about in the future. But I find accounting to be difficult to even know whether I'm breaking even, just because of how many implicit costs are involved with running a label, driving your car to meet an artist and not necessarily accounting for those kilometers or miles for Americans. But I think that is such an issue is, I buy some things for myself as an artist, or I buy some things for my family that the label uses. And here in Canada, we have tax things with I use a portion of my house for my business and blah, blah, blah. So it's so hard to really know if we're breaking even, but there is such a great feeling of selling out of a cassette or selling out of vinyl, or that if you sell half of your vinyl that you ordered, that you've broken even just based on those numbers. And so it is a great thing. I love that. And I think it's a huge win. And it's a modest win. I mean, here's somebody saying my goal in my business is to break even. I think that's a really modest thing, but it is a really smart thing to aim for. Number 5, when I asked what would they consider to be a big win for your label, and I think this applies to indie artists as well, not just indie labels, but DIY artists. Number 5, I had to break into 2, 5A and 5B. 5A is a natural jump in recognition for an artist that kind of launches them into a proper career. So this isn't necessarily Taylor Swift tweeting about your artist. This is just that natural growth where that tipping point occurs, where maybe they can now make a living, or maybe when they go out on tour, people come to the shows and there are towns that are consistent. I love this model where when you have Spotify followers who follow your artists, these bands on Spotify, they now get delivered their new releases. And so there becomes a point and I look at some of the follower counts on some of these indie artists, there comes a point that when they release a new record, a few thousand people or more, hopefully, are instantly receiving that record pumped into their feed or in their release radar. I think it's such a cool thing. And so I think 5A is that moment where some of these things happen where you put up a pre-order for a new record, the artist is so established that they start to sell these pre-orders, that it makes sense to press vinyl. It makes sense to do a run of cassettes because you're going to sell it. That is, to me, that's one that I really relate with. I obviously have released a lot of new artists who don't have any following at all or have a really small following, and it's really hard to stay motivated. And so it's such a great thing when that artist over a few years evolves into an established artist where people appreciate their music and appreciate their back catalog. The second half of that, number 5, and this was a different point, but I think it falls into the same topic, is an artist picked up by a major. Not necessarily Universal or a major, but an artist going to the next step for a label. And it's something that we've seen, and we've talked to a ton of labels who have seen that. And we actually talk about it in that free guide I was telling you about. And I know a lot of people listening to this have checked that out. But that idea of how do we refer to upscaling or up? I don't know, but basically it's like going up a ladder. So they move on from your label to, like a B level label or an A level indie label, and then maybe even a major or whatever. But I think it's a cool thing. And I thought that it was great that somebody said that is something that they would consider a big win, because I know a lot of artists, a lot of indie labels might take that personally, or might take that as a bit of a slight to their label, that they are not, capable of handling an artist after they become successful. I don't think that's it. I think it's, and Ben Hubbard of Party Damage and Infinite Companion talked about this in the free guide. But I think it's a natural thing, and I think there's a lot of humility when you're able to kind of usher or to help prop up an artist that you worked with from the beginning onto another label. I think that's a cool thing. Thank you so much for all the labels who sent these responses. If something here is kind of like ringing a bell with you, and you have some more thoughts on it, you can send me a message on Instagram at Other Record Labels, or my email is podcast@otherrecordlabels.com. And let me know your thoughts. And if you want to share with me your big win, that would be cool too, because I found this really helpful. Let me go back over these 5. Number 1 is an unsolicited write-up, basically free press. Number 2 is an increased interest in the label's back catalog. I love that one. Number 3 is a popular indie artist recommending one of your bands to their fans. That's really cool. And then number 5 is a natural jump in recognition for an artist, natural growth, and even maybe an artist upscaling to a bigger label and getting picked up by a bigger indie label. So those are the 5 big wins I wanted to share with you from these responses I got from the labels. Thanks again to the labels for sharing that. If you haven't already, please leave us a review on iTunes. It's surprisingly helpful. And subscribe to the podcast is also a cool thing. And check out that free guide if you haven't already. You go to otherrecordlabels.com and you can download it there. Thanks so much for tuning in. Appreciate it.